income, but it had over $3 million worth of business in 2015. Mr. Ness hit a very good point. The ice arena would generate a tremendous amount of traffic that would result in lots and lots of folks using our hotels and our restaurants. Promoting recreational tourism is smart. It builds for the future. We know that people already come in here. Promoting the ice arena, I think, would help even more with that. But whether it's a priority, I don't know. I don't have enough information. But we do need to look at our wastewater treatment plant. We have to look at our infrastructure, and looking at the wall on the river and where that flooding occurred has got to be done. So all of that needs to be put together to determine what our CIP should be. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Ms. Weifeld, do you want me to repeat the question? What should the city's capital improvement projects list be, and how would you rank items like a new ice arena and liquor store in that list?
Thank you. Yeah, I find the capital improvement plan incredibly helpful as a counselor as we're prioritizing those capital projects that we need to have as a city. So to put it in context, some of the capital projects that we've wrapped up recently were the new police facility, which was desperately needed and was many years in the making, the library renovation, which was, I think, 20 years in the making, and the city hall renovation, which was another issue of deferred maintenance. So this council has stepped up and taken care of a lot of capital projects, and we have done that by prioritizing our needs. And I would say, in relation to the ice arena and liquor store, some other things that I think are on the capital improvement plan are our portion of the fire facility that's going to be coming at us, improvements to our wastewater treatment plant. We've talked about infrastructure for economic development, especially in the annexed 530 acres, and we've talked about addressing the impacts of climate change and weather events. So we know that, so we start with a list, right? And we generate this list, and there's things that are left over, holdovers on the list. There are new things that come to the list or resurface, like an ice arena. And so you add those in, you study. We have an ice arena study going on. We are have the liquor store study. You evaluate the projects as they develop, and you balance them with the other projects and the needs of the community.
All right, thank you.
Okay, next question. We'll start with Mr. Ness. 90 seconds, please. There are those in the community who feel that local government is dysfunctional. How would you go about restoring confidence in our elected officials?
I think a lot of that I've mentioned before is decorum. We need to respect others' opinions and use Robert's Rules of Order appropriately. That book is amazing, and it keeps business meetings on a civil level. I think that's what needs to be done to restore confidence in the whole council. And it will help get all the projects that are before them accomplished in a timely manner, and not have meetings extend late into the evening with arguing and bickering. So that's how I would accomplish that.
Mr. Butler, same question.
All governments are dysfunctional to some degree. I addressed that in my opening statement. It's quite natural. It's in the nature of the beast. Not long ago, it was declaimed loud and clear that there was too much testosterone on the council. I'm sure you all heard it said loud and often. Nowadays, if you listen carefully, it's whispered that there's too much of the other stuff. It's a pity that at this late stage in this election year, best exemplified at the national level, it comes down to testicles and uteruses, because that's all I'm hearing. And that's what's going to inform the election right up until November the 8th. All I can offer is that when you enter the privacy of the voting booth, try to put gender aside.
Mr. Colby, there are those in the community who feel that local government is dysfunctional. How would you go about restoring confidence in our elected officials?
Well, first of all, as a public defender, I resent the idea that the Northfield city government is dysfunctional. I'm not going to say they don't have problems. Of course they do. Norman is right. I mean, every unit of government is going to have its ups and downs and bumps. But they've gotten a lot done. But the question is, how do we improve their image when it comes to getting the job done? First, you have to respect the other side. You respect the other side when you're listening and when you're talking. You don't call the other side names. If you dislike the proposal that the other side has made, you say, I don't agree with that because of the following reasons. You don't use the word stupid or anything like that. You sit in a courtroom for 33 years. One of the things I've learned is that when you use disrespectful language, a person in a black robe will slap you upside the head. But respect begins with each individual. The next thing is the council members need to talk to each other outside of council meetings. You have to build up trust. You have to learn about the other person. And when they're upset or they dislike something, you take a step back, and you have to always keep in mind it's not personal, and you should never make it personal. The city's business, the public come first. Thank you.
Ms. Zweifel, same question.
Thank you. Well, there's always room for improvement, and one thing that I'm still very interested in, I haven't forgotten about the League of Women Voters offer to do a training with the council. We weren't able to find a time for this council to do that training. I'm still very interested, and I hope that the offer still stands and that the League of Women Voters would assist the incoming council with a training on a meeting training on Robert's rules or whatever structure the council votes to put in place. I think it's important to have a structure, to have some rules, whether it's Robert's rules or one of the other recognized governing rules for running a meeting. Obviously, it's very important to be respectful of one another, and so I will continue to be a positive force on the council, and I would say one other issue to that is engaging with the citizens, listening to what they're saying in terms of that discourse. I have a high level of tolerance. I love democracy, and I tend not to take it personally. So it's helpful when I get that check and balance from the constituents that they think things have gone too far. So I'm listening to the constituents, and I'm taking that to heart, and I will continue to be a positive force on the council. Thank you.
Mr. Hoschauer, there are those in the community who feel that local government is dysfunctional. How would you go about restoring confidence in our elected officials?
Well, I think the other speakers have mentioned a lot of the points. I just go back and say I think the most important thing is to recognize that there are going to be differences of opinion, that these are honestly held differences, and that they deserve a respectful hearing and treating differing views with respect. You've got to hear them out, hear their reasons, and sometimes you can even change your mind based on what they say. I'd say taking into account the differing views and keeping things on a civil and respectful level is absolutely vital to a democratic function. But then when the decision is made by council vote, shall we say, the no votes have got to get with the program and support the decision, just like I learned in the Army. I had a lot of decisions go against me by my bosses, and then you just salute and say, yes, sir, and you do the job.
Thank you.
Okay, question number 9, and remember each candidate has 90 seconds to answer the following question. Mr. Butler, we'll start with you. What will you do to keep in touch with your constituents in the Northfield business community?
Well, I'm tempted to initiate a surgery and a pint at the Cow. But, I'll make myself available as much as possible. and indeed to all members of our community. How I do that and when I do that, I hate Facebook, I don't tweet. I've yet to decide.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Colby, what will you do to keep in touch with your constituents and the Northfield business community?
Well, first of all, I think that all of my constituents are important, not just the business community. I think it's to continue to do what I'm doing now, which is to be out in the community talking to a wide variety of people, visit stores, talk, striking up a conversation. I am one of those people who does not have a problem talking to someone I've never met. I like people, and I like to hear what they have to say. So I think it's to continue talking. I think having an email address that is published also helps a great deal. Email is incredible. One of the best things that ever happened. Not getting a hold of somebody on the phone is so frustrating, but email leaves a message right there. You can pick it up and you can follow it. But I am like Mr. Butler. I can't say I'm a big fan of Twitter or Facebook and don't use it very often. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Weifel, what would you do or continue to do to keep in touch with your constituents and the Northfield business community?
Thank you. That's a great question, and so many ways to go with it. I agree that it's important to keep in touch with all members of the community, including the business community. A couple things about myself specifically. So I am a member of the Northfield Rotary Club, and that gives me a tremendous opportunity to have a weekly contact with many local businesses. This last Thursday, we heard from Aurora Pharmaceuticals, who they expanded from the Cannon Valley Vet Clinic, expanded into Aurora Pharmaceuticals, and from 2010 till now, they've created almost 100 jobs, and they're continuing to look at new markets and new expansion. So through attending the Rotary events, I'm getting a lot of information, able to give a lot of information. I'm a chamber member twice. I found out from Todd through my employment at Carleton College, and through sitting on the council, we're chamber members and attend chamber events as possible. I try to get out in the community and attend community events and engage with people about the issues for which they are passionate. I find that's the best way to engage with the community, is to attend their events, the events that they set up, hear about what they're passionate about or concerned about, attending open houses on transportation or planning, and hear the concerns firsthand. I find incredibly helpful. So I try to be out there as much as possible and engaging on a direct level. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Hoschauer, what will you do to keep in touch with your constituents and the Northfield business community?
Well, I think, as Mr. Colby said, I think email is a great way to keep in touch, and you can also take and make a special folder to keep the constituents' inputs in some kind of an order, so you can refer back to them and take them into account. As far as businesses, my second ward includes businesses on the south side of or South Highway 3. I plan to periodically stop by the businesses, ask the managers and the owners what their issues might be and how I might help them. And like Ms. Weifel, I'm a member of Rotary Club, so I have those same opportunities that she has as far as keeping in touch with business. Facebook, I have a Facebook account. Last time I opened it, I had more than 6,000 unread tweets or accounts, and so I would not advise people to contact me by Facebook.
Thank you. Mr. Ness, what will you do to keep in touch with your constituents and the Northfield business community?
Sounding somewhat redundant, I think email is vitally important for individual contacts. And yes, I do have a Facebook page. I haven't updated it as often as I probably should, according to my wife, who runs several Facebook pages, but I think that's a good way to keep contact with people. You can throw an issue out there and they can see it and give you feedback on where they would like to see that issue going. I love speaking to groups. People that know me, if you put a microphone in front of me, I have fun. And I have been a member of the Chamber of Commerce for at least 20 years. I think that is a vitally important part of this community for businesses. And I try to attend as many chamber events as possible. Scheduling sometimes doesn't work, but that's the way that I would do the contacts.
Thank you.
All right, next question. Mr. Colby, start with you. What changes should the city establish that would improve the local business climate, encourage more business growth and development, and provide more property taxes and jobs for Northfield? That's a long one.
I'm going to have to ask you to repeat it. It's rather
Sure.
long.
Yep. What changes should the city establish that would improve the local business climate, encourage more business growth and development, and provide more property taxes and jobs for Northfield?
Okay. Given the size of that question, I think I'll just focus on how to improve the business climate. I think we have to recognize that Northfield is a destination, and we can take advantage of that by promoting tourism. Recreational tourism is growing. Millennials love to climb things. They love to bike. They love to get out and be physically, do physical things. We have the bike trail. We need to look at the ice arena and whether or not we can afford to do that to expand our winter attractions. We need to look at whether we can partner with St. Olaf College and Carleton College in that area and in other things. So I would take a look at that. But as I said previously, industrially, we are doing pretty well. We need to find a way to attract a business. I think the last major industry we attracted here was Cardinal Glass. That's over 20 years ago. I don't have answers on how we get an industry to come here. As far as commercially and helping the South Highway 3 to develop further, I think those plans are in place. We have service roads in place. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll repeat the question, Ms. Weifel, in 90 seconds. What changes should the city establish that would improve the local business climate, encourage more business growth and development, and provide more property taxes and jobs for Northfield?
Thank you. Yes, as Greg mentioned, that's a complex question that deserves more than 90 seconds. So I'll choose to focus my 90 seconds on a couple of ideas. I do believe it is important to diversify the tax base, especially since we have a number of nonprofits in town, and so that increases where the taxes are laid out. So first thing I'd mention would be economic gardening, which is to look at what you have existing already in place and to look for synergies and ways to assist and leverage and help the businesses that you already have. As I mentioned, Aurora Pharmaceuticals, and they plan to expand at some point in the future, knowing that that's going to happen. So being in touch with the businesses that we have, knowing their plans, being open to recruit businesses that they would work well with. And the quality of life is important, so the employees are important. Who is going to work for those businesses, and we need to keep the quality of life high for the millennials and for those aging in place. I would mention infill and redevelopment. Infrastructure costs are relatively fixed, so anytime we can increase density that doesn't impact that quality of life. On the flip side, we should do infill and redevelopment and increase the density to maximize those infrastructure costs.
All right, thank you. Mr. Hoshar, do you want me to repeat the question?
No, my mind is already sold out over that. So, no, to increase our and attract business to Northfield, I think one of the most important things we have to do is really take a look at our bureaucratic procedures. When I was on the EDA, I talked to several businesses who were looking to come to Northfield, who ultimately did not. And checking with some of them, they just said it was too much of a bureaucratic hassle. So that's one of the things we really need to take a look at. Now, I would hope in the meantime that's gotten better. But I would agree with Mr. Colby. We have to find ways to bring people here as a destination. When we bring people into town, they spend their money here. So that's a tourism thing. And we need to look at business also in a regional context. It's not only inside the city limits, but businesses that sort of feed into Northfield. I would recommend that we do kind of a survey of businesses and ask them what kinds of businesses can support theirs. Do they need raw materials? Do they need access to different things? We could attract businesses that can help our existing businesses in a synergistic way.
All right, thank you. Mr. Ness, do you want me to read it again?
If you can do it within 90 seconds.
I'll see what I can do. What changes should the city establish that would improve the local business climate, encourage more business growth and development, and provide more property taxes and jobs for Northfield?
There was one issue that really convinced me to run for council, and it was the land development code that came to the city council from the planning commission. Planning commission had a document that they spent an awful lot of time on, and the council took it and made up what I would consider their own land development code, which again would, in my mind, created a roadblock to business development, especially outside the historic downtown district on Highway 3, with the two-story building. I would also rely heavily on the Northfield Chamber, because they're out and about, they have the buzz of the whole business climate in this town, to say, okay, what is the council doing right? What are they doing wrong? And again, it is really refreshing that the city is hiring an EDA coordinator. I think that's very important to look at businesses and try and get them attracted to Northfield.
All right, thank you. Mr. Butler?
I suppose two things. Remove obstacles and enable development. I think, as you know, we've covered this in a few other ways and addressed it. And the obstacles, of course, certainly in City Hall, is the transformation from saying, the answer is no now, what's the question, to yes, how can we help you with your ideas. And the other one is to support the particularly the entrepreneur. But I have a couple of things I've always thought were really good in terms of enabling development, and one is to create a quiet zone, a railroad quiet zone, either side of the railroad tracks for as long as it goes through Northfield. They've done it in other cities at some cost, probably around about $250,000 per crossing. But that will attract small businesses along it. It'll raise property values and therefore taxes. And it'll silence the train whistle, which is vitally important. And the other one is I do think that dam should be removed. And that would encourage a lot of recreational activity, fishing, kayaking, you name it. And it will also, I am convinced, will ameliorate the problem with the flooding.
All right, thank you.
Okay, next question for 90-second response, please. We'll start with Ms. Weifel. What is your definition of economic development, and what is one thing that you would do to improve that in Northfield?
Wow, let me get to, I have to, my definition of economic development is promoting and supporting businesses and the quality of life that supports those businesses. And the one, well, I have to pick one thing. I guess I would pick as my one. I often do this to pick one thing. I pick a really big thing. So I would pick our planning documents, our comprehensive plan, our land development code, our comprehensive economic development plan. We have some. We've given a lot of thought as a community to planning, and I think we've done a really good job. We tend to fall short in the implementation of that. So I would look at the plans that we have in place and the incredible work that we did to get them in place, and I would improve the implementation of our guiding documents.
Mr. Hoschauer, what is your definition of economic development, and what is one thing that you would do to improve that in Northfield?
Economic development for me comes down to business and jobs. So we need to improve the business climate, make it easier for businesses to come here, which create jobs. To improve that, I would say we have to look at what are the hindrances besides the bureaucracy that are restrictive on businesses, and some of those things, as I mentioned earlier, are space, proper infrastructure. If we're going to put a business park out there by west of the hospital, then we need to invest in infrastructure ahead of time, so that when a business comes, they've got what they need to get started.
Mr. Ness, same question.
Economic development, again, is getting more tax revenue into town, into the city. You raise taxes or lower expenditures, and if you can raise taxes, everybody probably should be happy, because their taxes should go down if you're doing it equally across the board. Again, Erica mentioned, and I think it's vitally important, to take those documents and don't just shelve them. Look at them, review them, bring an issue forward often. If you spend time on a document, why not use it in the future? Yes, it could change, but at least you're reviewing the documents that you spent the time on.
Mr. Butler, what is your definition of economic development, and what is one thing that you would do to improve that?
Well, from the council's point of view, which I think is separate from, for example, the chamber's point of view, the council's point of view, it's to enable and not necessarily to provide, and it's to support the organisation like the chamber in their efforts to recruit businesses and to attract businesses. I think what the council can do is, as I said, remove obstacles. And the one thing, I think, there's lots of stuff you could do. But I think you can do an awful lot of stuff without spending an awful lot of money, terms like capital improvement, stuff like that. I think what we can do is support, at the state level, the Dan Patch rail link. That will be an enabling idea. At the local level, or at least the council's level, I think it comes down to toss up between the dam, removing the dam, and doing the quiet zone, the railroad quiet zone, for me.
Mr. Colby?
Well, I think the various definitions that have been provided about economic development can't be improved upon. But I think we have to approach this fairly carefully. Is the question, are we trying to grow economically at all costs? Or is the question, do we want to grow in light of and in the framework of the values that this community has established over the last 60, 70 years? Do we want to have the kind of development that we've seen in other communities like Owatonna, Albert Lea, and Austin? I mean, the complaints about the land development code, the economic development, they're too long, they're too much. If you go online and you look at St. Cloud has 281 pages in its land development code. If you go up to St. Cloud and look at the incredible development that's occurred over the last 10 years, that development looks really, really good for two people, shoppers and developers. In light of who we want to be as a community, in light of our desire to preserve our downtown and promote historical preservation, I don't think we can do something like that. We don't want to hollow out our downtown like Owatonna is doing and Albert Lea has already done. But trains and rail are one of the best ways that we can go because of the incredible development we are seeing along University Avenue. It works.
Thank you.
I'm ready to defer.
All right. Next question, Mr. Hoschauer, we'll start with you. Do you support the idea of Northfield creating shovel-ready commercial and industrial parks? If so, what is your plan to create them, and would they be city-owned? Would you like me to repeat it?
No, I heard it. I do, to a degree. I'd say if we're going to have an industrial park here, we have to have the preconditions for the business to come in and set up. We're talking about sort of basic stuff, roads, access to power, access to sewer and water. I think that that's the city's job, so that piece would definitely be city-owned. I guess there could be an option for developers to acquire the property for themselves, but the basic infrastructure of the industrial park has got to belong to the city. Thank
you. Mr. Ness?
I think it's vitally important that the city have some shovel-ready areas. The business park that's being proposed by the Realtor Association and XL Energy out toward the hospital, the city does not own that land. I think we need to get an agreement with those landowners that, yes, they would sell that land to a potential business that wanted to come in. The city is going to have some expenditures in terms of infrastructure, but it is important to have that stuff at least in line so a business can say, yes, I do want to come here.
All right, thank you. Mr. Butler?
In the current and foreseeable economic climate, which is, as far as I can see, dire, it's not appropriate. Its time may come, but it's not now. In a way, you've got to look at the sort of bigger picture, as they say, what's happening globally, to the world economy, to the currencies, all of that stuff. And you've got to be fairly judicious in how you leap into something like this. As I say, I think Northfield is well arranged and attractive enough for big businesses to come and knock on our door. And then there's a strong possibility that something like this could happen, but I don't see it happening. It didn't happen in 2008 when it was first mooted, and I can't see it happening now. So I wouldn't waste staff time and energy and money on something that is, the future is uncertain to say the least. I would much rather, as I say, develop what's undeveloped and put this kind of thing, once again, on the back burner.
All right, thank you. Mr. Colby, I'll repeat the question. Do you support the idea of Northfield creating shovel-ready commercial and industrial parks? And if so, what is your plan to create them, And would they be city-owned?
Well, we have the area between Highway 3 and the river for various commercial and industrial development. We have the area north of the hospital, north of St. Olaf campus, where the hospital and the solar farm are located. I would need a lot more before I would make any commitment. What is the need? What is the cost of our involvement? What are the problems and impediments to those kinds of businesses, especially industrial, to coming to Northfield? We have to be pragmatic. And while I don't take nearly as bleak a view of the future as Mr. Butler, we need to be pragmatic. We need to be careful. It is the public's money, not ours. And given that it has been well over 20 years since the last major industry came, namely Cardinal Glass, we should approach with great caution. That's not to say that we shouldn't be cooperative, that we shouldn't be open-minded to these opportunities, but we need to be careful.
Thank you, Ms. Weifel.
Sure. Sorry. I had my microphone off, and you've asked another question that's not possible to answer in 90 seconds, but I'll give it a shot. So my answer is that it depends. As we mentioned earlier, the CIP, to balance this with other priorities, so balance that infrastructure cost with other priorities. We need to do a future needs assessment. How will that infrastructure affect our current capacity and our capacity into the future? So that's a really important piece. Jobs created, what kind of jobs? Are they living wage jobs? What kind of housing stock do we have in place to absorb that increased workforce? How does it affect our schools? There are so many pieces of our community that this would touch. And again, very importantly, a cost-benefit analysis. So what is the time frame for the payback on that investment that the city would potentially make? So I see this, it was unfortunate that in 2008, the recession hit and we were not able to move forward with, as we acquired the land, to just keep seamlessly moving that forward. But I think it's good that we paused, and I'm looking forward to how this moves forward and to getting a lot of those questions raised and answered as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Ness, we'll start with you, 90 seconds. What is one issue not being talked about in this race that should be?
As I mentioned at the outset, I don't have a hot button issue. I've talked about the issues that are important to me regarding city council and the way they function and the way they do business and how they plan to attract business. So beyond that, I think, I don't have a hot button issue. I think the city staff has been doing a wonderful job on getting things to the council, and I'm encouraged on the addition of people and trying to get up to full staff, so.
Thank you. Mr. Butler?
I suppose the biggest problem facing the council, again, facing all governments at the moment, is self-censorship of the individual self-censors. Doesn't say what they want to say. We operate in an environment really that is anathema, as I said, to free expression, freedom of speech. And I think it's very important for not just the council members, but all of us to sort of stop this self-censorship. I mean, be careful, I think the word's respectful of other people and their opinions, but say what you think and mean what you say.
Thank you. Mr. Colby, what is one issue not being talked about in this race that should be?
Well, first of all, this is the only forum that we've had so far. I think we're going to have two more. And it is difficult for city council candidates, and I suspect mayors, to get in front of groups of people, it is hard to talk about city government because, and it needs to be discussed, the city council has had its problems, but they have accomplished a fair number of things. The renovation on the library, the construction of the police department. There have been a number of others I just can't rattle off at this point, but they have gotten things done. I think the mayor mentioned the other day that in the last 4 years they've passed something like 1,300 resolutions. They have gotten things done. The problem, of course, is how they get along. And that's based to a large extent on personalities. And that can be hard. I have had the wonderful experience of being with some absolutely brilliant lawyers who couldn't talk to juries. They just couldn't do it. So that's the one that I think comes to mind. Thank you.
Ms. Zweifel, same question.
Thank you. Well, I'm torn between two issues, so I'll tell you which two issue and then extrapolate on the one that I chose. So I'm torn between climate change, weather events, and flooding. It's been brought up at the dais, but there weren't any specific questions about how we would approach that, and I'd welcome talking to anyone about that. But I'm going to go with my answer as demographics and aging population. We know the boomers are aging, and we've heard reports from the state demographer about that, and I think as a community, we need to be thinking forward and looking ahead to that age demographic as it hits us. Again, we've talked about transportation, we've talked about infrastructure, we've talked about quality of life, and so how will Northfield deal with that change in demographics that's headed our way?
Mr. Hoschauer, what is one issue not being talked about in this race that should be?
I think Mr. Butler and Mr. Colby have both mentioned things that have to do with flooding. Whether one agrees with taking out the dam is a different issue, but at least it addresses or attempts to address the flooding problem. And the area along north of the bridge where we need to work on that retaining wall, I think is an important issue for the businesses along there and for the future development of that area, or the future viability of that area. So I would say I'd put flooding right up there.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. We've come to wrap up and closing remarks. Remember, each candidate will have 2 minutes for closing remarks. Mr. Butler, we'll start with you. 2 minutes for your closing remarks.
Okay, it's the year 2030. Population of Northfield and surrounding area, 30,000. Northfield is joined with Dundas, Waterford and Bridgewater. One municipality, one fire service, one police service. A railroad quiet zone either side of railroad tracks. An economic development which has increased property values, consolidated and attracted economic investment and housing, raised the tax base and silenced the train whistle. The former Kmart store is now an open plan trade school, planned, designed and operated by local tradespeople and enabled by our staff, especially the EDA. The dam is removed, the riverbed dredged, fish swim upstream, canoes paddle downstream, no more floods, and Northfield, more than ever, perceived as a destination town for business, visitors, education, shopping and entertainment, and of course, simply living. Light rail picks up and delivers passengers to and from the Twin Cities and Rochester on the hour, every hour. Our city government, slimmer and less costly, no longer needs to give tax breaks and other financial incentives to attract businesses and the entrepreneur, but rather welcomes them with open arms as they seek to locate here. For some years now, and in the name of greater transparency, the Northfield News and our city's website has published a complete list of all senior city employees' salaries and benefits, an income and expenditure account and balance sheet for the city as a whole, and sub-accounts for all the city entities, including the liquor store, library, fire and police services, etc. The more local the democracy, the more democratic it is. And the results of the latest 8-year vote confirms our city's charter as in its strong mayor status.
Thank you. Mr. Colby, 2 minutes for your closing remarks.
Thank you. Been a pleasure to be here. Appreciate the opportunity. As I said at the beginning, I think there are some changes that we need to make. We need to promote greater civility on the city council. We need to continue to maintain the downtown as the city's centerpiece. It is why people come to Northfield. They come because of it. They come because of the colleges. They come because of the recreational opportunities. One of the great ways that we can improve our business environment is to recognize that we are a tourism center in rural Minnesota. We can do that in a variety of ways. Smart growth, planning, and the continued development of bike trails and by connecting to the regional network. We promote smart growth by the development of rail. Connecting us with Rochester and the Twin Cities puts us in the line running between St. Cloud and Rochester, which is where the state planning officials have said that's where the development and growth is going to occur in Minnesota in the future. We take advantage of the incredible intellectual capital that we have in Northfield. Finally, we continue to recognize that planning works to our advantage, that plans are in place, that we have had plans, namely the comprehensive plan in place for at least 20 years or more, that provide us with a roadmap for the future in a wide range of areas. And we continue to recognize the value of process, that we work to improve that process so that we are as proud of each project as we are of the Northfield Library renovation. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Weifel, 2 minutes for your closing remarks.
Thank you. Thanks again to our sponsors and all of our attendees today. Northfield is a great place to live, and I enjoy my service to this community. I am proud of our recent projects, the library renovation, the City Hall renovation, and the new police facility, and I look forward to the next round of community-driven projects. I will continue to be a positive force on the City Council. One of my favorite things about being on the council is listening to community members as they share their passion for an idea or concern and then working with them to address it. And I think that the library is a good example of that, not only getting that 20-year project to completion, but adding in things like accessibility and the aesthetics that we were able to wrap into that project. I believe in doing this in a fair and equitable manner through proper planning that addresses future needs assessment, smart growth, and finding opportunities to operationalize equity. I enjoy my service on the council, and I would welcome another 4 years. I look forward to opportunities to move Northfield forward in a sustainable and equitable manner. It is an honor and a pleasure to serve the community, and I would ask for your support in the upcoming election. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Hoschauer, 2 minutes for your closing remarks.
When I was a student at St. Olaf, I thought Northfield would be a great place to live someday. It took me 35 years to get back here, but when my boss in Germany said, we want you to represent us in the States, and we've got a partnership with a company in Minneapolis, it was a no-brainer for me. So what I'd like to see, I think Northfield is an ideal place to live, and and an ideal place to live, and I want to assist in developing increasing business, increase our tax base while still preserving our historic downtown, which is a major draw. As far as the work on the council is concerned, I agree with virtually everybody here. We need to increase civility and respect for one another. But we also need to take a look at using the procedures that are already in place properly. The city charter says, for example, the council establishes committees, for example, the land development committee to investigate issues and make recommendations, and then I think when the council actually ought to follow those recommendations when they're made. One thing that I failed to mention before is, as a capital improvement, I think we need to put something on the west side of the rail line to house an emergency vehicle in case there happens to be an emergency on that side of the tracks when a train is pushing itself back and forward there by Post and Maltmobile. At present, there's no good way, no fast way to get over there to respond to an emergency.
Thank you. Mr. Ness, 2 minutes for your closing remarks.
Again, thank you to the KYMN and Northfield News for sponsoring and the Northfield Chamber for hosting this event. I think the city has done several very good things recently. Again, they mentioned the library and the police department. The mayor has put together the whole council involved in Beyond the Yellow Ribbon and the Mayor's Youth Council. I think those are vitally important issues. I think it is very important for the council to follow the charter. If you have a question on the charter, ask the city attorney. They probably will have an answer. If they don't, they will get it. I think civility in the council meetings will also greatly reduce the time that the council meetings last. They should not last till 10 o'clock if things are run on a friendly, cordial level. I think it's very important that we have intergovernmental cooperation. We need to sit down with Dundas and the townships to say, here's our plan. Where are we going to go? What are we going to do 5 years from now? And that may indeed happen now, but I think more of that has to happen. And I want to thank Administrator Ben Mardig. He's done a wonderful job as far as I can see, and I'm very excited to see that the city is hiring the EDA person, because business growth, I think, is an important part of the puzzle.
Thank you. I'd like to thank each of the candidates for attending today's Northfield City Council Candidate Forum. I'd also like to take this time to thank the City of Northfield for the use of the facilities for the four forums, and for city staff for videotaping each of these. Please check out these forums online at either the Chamber website, KYMN website, and the Northfield News website. Thank you for attending the forum. Have a great day, and remember to vote on Tuesday, November 8th. Thank you.